Thanks for inviting me and having me here. Can everyone hear at the back? Hands up if you can't hear what I'm saying. Cool. So thanks to Jen and to Russmedia for hosting. I wanted to come yesterday, but I couldn't make it, but managed to get here late last night, and it looks like you guys have been working super hard, which is cool. I think I have like the most difficult job in the room just because, firstly, this is supposed to be a masterclass and I'm following Simon Rogers yesterday, who really is an expert of the kind of level that I'm just absolutely not. But of course, all of you guys have about 2 hours to finish your apps, and you really don't want to be listening to me at the front going, this is how you build a news app. So, as I said, I'm no kind of expert. I'm not a journalist, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a designer, so you guys are all much bigger experts than I am, but I spend most of my time working with, some kind of combination of these three things to try and build news apps. So, when I was trying to think of what I should talk about, I always try and like to talk from my own experience, but I actually just asked my team. And I'll tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, but I got them all to send me an email, and I basically got about 50 emails with amazing things that we learnt whilst trying to build news apps. And there's a kind of subtitle for this presentation, and it's going to be very short, I hope, and slightly engaging and relatively high level. And I've actually written a blog post and posted that with slightly more detail that you can kind of go into later, because I know that you guys will want to get back to your GitHub repositories and so on. So this is the subtitle of the presentation, which is How to Fail. And I sort of thought I'd start by kind of really raising expectations. In fact, I already failed because it was supposed to be 10 things we learnt, and I couldn't come up with 10. So, as Antoine said, I'm the head of communications at SourceFabric. We are a non-profit organization. We have 60 people worldwide in 12 countries, and we have 4 open source projects. They are basically software projects that try and help independent media organizations produce quality journalism, no matter where they are, and I guess no matter what their resources are. This software is downloaded about 50,000 times every year in over 160 countries. And we have 3 main offices, one in Prague, one in Berlin, one in Toronto, and I'm based in Berlin. And actually we've been going since 1999. We started off as part of the Media Development Loan Fund, the kind of anarchist geek wing of this kind of media funding organization. And then we spun off into our own organization for just developing software in 2010, so 3 years. It might even be our birthday today, actually. I should look that up. And of course, since 1999, like, lots of stuff has changed with news. We were building kind of open source web CMSs back then when it was kind of tough and there weren't so many of these things around, and news was a very different kind of climate and environment. And of course now, and I don't need to tell most of you guys, this news is really obviously a totally different landscape. News now is no longer just made by professionals. We have to engage citizens, and there's lots of kind of user-generated content that comes to the fore, and social media. Obviously, news now needs to find audiences, not vice versa. So we don't expect people to come to the newsstand. We have to really deliver that content to them, of course. Journalists themselves, their role is changing. They have to do much more. They're expected to know HTML, some data viz. They're obviously responsible for news gathering, verification. They might be expected to go out and shoot video, take pictures. This has all changed since we started 15 years ago. And of course now news organizations very rarely break news. In fact, some people say they don't ever break news now. Platforms break news. So Twitter breaks news, Facebook breaks news, and it's the job of the news organization to verify, contextualize, and add backstory. Of course, news is never a finished product these days either. It's no longer an article, it's published and it's finished, but it's being continually updated, I guess. This kind of idea of a perpetual beta, where the news story is never finished, and this is where we see the rise of live blogging technologies, for instance. And of course, data, code, and graphics all matter. How many of the teams here are working with data, graphics, or code in some kind of way to build their news app? I assume and hope every single one. And there are more and more events like this, and I'm, I think, attending one of these now every week for the next 3 years, which is great. And of course, old business models no longer work. These advertising revenues are disappearing. The print pound is turning into digital pennies, and a lot of media organizations are finding challenges where they have to diversify their output, they have to become more sustainable, they have to find new advertising revenue, but they're also moving into dating services and putting on events and other kinds of revenue streams. So, taking all of these challenges that we see, that are very different since 1999, but really, actually, they're kind of being faced by newsrooms all over the world. We have a remit that kind of brings us mainly to work with organizations in developing countries, in transitional democracies, let's say. It's kind of a quaint term. Post-dictatorship areas, that kind of thing. So we've been, this week already I've been working on newsrooms in Belarus, in Georgia, in Yemen, Senegal, Mali, Côte d'Ivoire. So places where news is not kind of easy to make, and being a journalist is not always easy, but they're still facing exactly the same challenges as, the kind of European organizations that we also experience and most of you guys work for. One of the kind of like the fun parts of my job is bringing these kind of organizations together into a global innovation cycle. So one of the primary ways that we work is to really take innovation that comes from the margins with these organizations in Belarus, Senegal, Yemen, etc. And there we find that we can work with them because they have a slightly more lean, agile approach to building news. They have more scope, they have less legacy, they don't have huge printing presses. They can often leap straight into a mobile-first strategy or into a digital-first strategy. So most of our good work comes from basically working with these guys, building newsrooms, and then bringing these ideas back and then selling them to European organizations, which helps us to be sustainable. We're a non-profit organization, but it also builds this global innovation cycle because everything we do is open source, everything we release is free. So that these new ideas come back into the software, they get released, they benefit the guys in Senegal, they benefit the guys in Switzerland. That's the principle, at least. So very quickly, I'm going to take you through two projects that we worked on and show you how this kind of works. The first is West Africa Democracy Radio. They're based out of Dakar, and I spent 2 weeks there building their new digital newsroom. They broadcast via FM, satellite, and online to 8 countries in the region. It's a region that speaks 1,500 languages, and it's probably like 3 times the size of Western Europe, so it's huge. So these guys have a really complex network of information gathering. Their old way of working was with CDs, USB sticks, taxi drivers, pilots running around with bits of paper, and a website that could only hold 3 articles at any one time. So they're producing 24 hours of live radio, and none of it was being archived. So the first thing we did was like, wow, you guys are amazing journalists, you're doing a lot of work. We need to kind of make this stuff sticky and make it stay on the web and make you be able to share it. So we built a new platform using a couple of bits of software that we developed called Airtime and NewsScoop, which are about radio. The first is a radio software, and the second is a CMS for news. And then we basically combined it with Soundcloud, which I guess is a web service that most of you guys will know is a web service for sharing audio. Once we launched the site, and we basically used SoundCloud to allow them to upload sounds, connect the CMS, connect it to the radio station, and share this kind of information a lot more effectively. We launched the site, and they had 500,000 increase in visitors within the first week, and that basically stayed immediately. So just by reaching the diaspora, reaching a new online audience, they were basically able to really drive a lot of traffic. They now have 80,000 followers on SoundCloud, which makes them bigger than France 24, pushing the BBC actually for size. And this is a team of 12 journalists based out of Dakar. So the kind of lessons that we take from this, but we then try and take to kind of European news organizations, is that obviously placing social media at the heart of your strategy is a really good idea. They taught us this. We also learned that being unique is a really important idea. Like, they do audio, they're amazing at audio. So let's just sort of make this the primary focus of their platform and the way that they share. They could have done YouTube, we could have made it a Twitter or Facebook driven strategy, but audio is where it's at. And of course, thinking local is super important. They're not writing stories about what's happening in Yemen or what's happening right now in Burma or Myanmar. They're basically writing about West African issues, but thinking that there's a huge diaspora and they want to be able to spread this stuff out to those people. So that's very important. And I think the second or third biggest kind of hits on the site actually comes from Japan, and there's a huge diaspora coming from Japan that are really using to kind of follow this. And they had no idea there's a big Senegalese following in Japan. The second one I wanted to talk about really quickly was the Yemen Times. This is Yemen's first and most widely read English language news site. They have the biggest, I think, online news archive in Yemen, and definitely the kind of first and only one in English. They were taken offline by a bunch of technical problems in 2011 when there was a lot of kind of focus on bin Laden, so Yemen was very much in the news. And they went offline because they had basically a totally cranky CMS, and it was really awful. So they came to us and asked us to help, and we basically worked with them to kind of somehow restore this corrupt database, migrate it to a new CMS, implemented a lot of SEO features so that their news articles would be found by the global media, and gave them a visual redesign which was fully responsive from day one. So it looked great on mobile and tablet. And this was 2 years ago, way before a lot of the big news sites now that are supposedly fully responsive were doing any of this stuff. So we restored this archive, and of course then realized for them it was amazing. They saved a lot of money. They were able to open new offices because they were working much more efficiently, and they're even moving into radio now, which they never thought they would do, but they're going to set up the first FM station, independent station in Yemen, which is such a kind of amazing thing. It's not like it's illegal, but there's actually no legislation at all because no one's ever thought about doing it before. So obviously archives are really important, and they're using this is their strength. WADR, it's audio. Theirs is they have this amazing archive. But of course they're using design to compete. They can now compete on an international stage, despite again being a very, very small newsroom, because they look professional. They were always producing good news, but if it looks terrible, it's really difficult to kind of convince people that this is something they should be following and something that they should be sharing. The obligatory blank slide. So I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about what we learned. And this is not, again, trying to come from a position of experts, but basically saying that we failed a lot. We've made a lot of mistakes since we started in kind of 1999. We've built a lot of really bad news applications. We've built bad features for those news applications. But we try and bring in a kind of paradigm that failure is not necessarily a bad thing if you kind of learn from it. So this is less about saying, hey, you guys should all do this, but more about saying, well, when you make mistakes, how do you learn from it and how do you improve your work? And I kind of am taking this as a slight guideline, being on the jury for the session later, as a kind of guideline of how I will look at some of these kind of apps that you guys are building. So the 8 lessons that my team gave me. The first, obviously, of course, is think data. Now, that makes sense, especially when we're at something kind of verging on data journalism workshop. But it's not just about the visualization of data as well, but also how you're going to export and import data. How API driven is your stuff? What are those APIs doing? Will those APIs still be around in 5 years? How are those APIs going to connect with other applications in the newsroom? And how can you import and export data very, very easily so that if technology changes or if your business model changes, how do you not lose everyone's data, especially if that's something that's at the core part of the product or the app that you're building? In other words, you want to try and future-proof yourself as much as possible. The second lesson that the team sort of sent back to me was one that we have as a paradigm of everything we're building right now, which is this create once, publish everywhere idea. So if you're building a kind of content creation app of any kind, you obviously need to think, how are people going to experience this app? Where are they going to experience this app? The content that this is producing, what will they be looking at it on in 5 years? The iPad obviously came out and was a complete game changer for most news organizations, and it came from left field for a lot of people. And now everyone has to have an iPad journal or an iPad app. So what is the next iPad? And if this comes out, can you immediately repackage all of your content to be available on that? Can you do what Yemen Times did and go, well, you know what, we want to build a radio station now, but we don't want to set up a whole radio team. How can we use our news production workflows but just seamlessly push to radio as well? Defining users is obviously a really obvious one, but really important, and a lot of people forget to do it. And we've done this a ton in the past as well. Airtime, our radio app, we started building it for small community radio stations. And then we were like, wow, this is fun. There's kind of nothing really like this. So we started building in all these extraordinarily complicated features, which then suddenly made it too complicated for the average bedroom DJ or someone who just wanted to set up a radio station. On the other hand, it wasn't complicated enough for the BBC to want to use it in professional production. So you have an idea where we then start having to build at both ends of the spectrum and kind of increase horizontally, I guess. And that becomes really difficult. It becomes really time consuming, and you build something that falls between two stools and actually no one really wants it. And now we're getting there slowly where we're managing to open up to a really easy user market, but then at the end also opening up to more professional users. This is a bad visual metaphor for a spectrum. And of course, listen to your users. Way too many conversations that I see happening in tech companies are like, this guy on the left is the tech company telling people like, this is how things are. This is really how you should be doing stuff, and this is how you should be building stuff. But of course, it should be the other way around. This guy on the left should be the user, and he's saying, look, this is the way I want it to work. So you really want to obviously be listening to your users, involving them in the blueprint at every stage, and getting them to really feedback design, even if it's completely contrary to what you believe. And I think this is probably the biggest tension that we have in our organization, is that on the one hand, our community are telling us something. On the other hand, we have an idea that this is what we want to build. And then on the other hand, there's we might have a client who basically wants something to be built for us. So as you're building apps and you're scaling apps, you need to really think about, well, how do we differentiate between those priorities? Of course, designing for scale is super, wow. Oh, hey, hi. It's just been off for 15 minutes. I've just been holding it. Designing for scale is obviously super important. Actually, I talked about Soundcloud earlier, and that's a really good example of an organization that was built to scale. They're fantastically popular now, and they are almost, let's say, kind of killing things like MySpace and to an extent Bandcamp and other audio sharing services.
We'll switch to another one.
Yeah, let's try it. This one's failing. So we'll just learn from the experience, which is I should talk louder. Hi. No.
It is on.
Yeah? Wow. Hi. The voice of God. Okay. Now I can whisper. Okay, so designing for scale. So SoundCloud, they're an organization, they're very cool, they do a lot of things great, they have a very sexy site, they have a very big community, all of this is great, but insiders know that the reason for SoundCloud's success was the architecture of their servers, more than anything. It allowed them to scale from 500,000 users to the kind of, well, I don't even know where they're at now, but I know they gained 5 million users in about 2 months. Now this wasn't because they had a really cool player, they had a very active kind of community strategy, but if the architecture wasn't there to scale, they would have gone under. And so many tech companies, the reasons why they go under and also apps fail is because they're just not built to scale in terms of the architecture, in terms of their plugin ability, the ability to kind of create new directions for the app. But then also for user growth as well, like what the user wants to do with it. If you can build it to scale and as users say, we want to do this or we want to do this, then you can scale in that direction as well. Of course, what you want to avoid is costly refactoring as well, which is when you have to change the platform a lot. And you have to change the code of the platform a lot in order to help you scale. And if you don't build scalability in at the beginning as a central paradigm, then you're basically going to be a little bit lost when you do get those new users, or those new users want your app to do something different. Coming up to the end now, but localize early, localize often is a big lesson that we learned the tough way. So localization is the practice of making sure that your software interface can be translated by the users of that software, and most of the time this needs some kind of framework that allows users to do this very easily. You don't really want them making kind of GitHub pull requests just in order to change a kind of menu item. And we learned this the hard way. Something like NewScoop, which is a CMS that we build, is kind of actually quite good at this. Since it was first developed, there was always a localization framework, which has meant that we can basically deploy it very quickly in countries with interesting character sets or different alphabets and obviously different languages. But Airtime and BookType, two other softwares that we make for radio and books, they didn't have this feature built in. So we've basically spent the last 3 months actually having to kind of go back and rejig it and refactor and build this code in, which obviously is not a great way to work. Now they're fully localizable and we suddenly have it in 20 languages, and suddenly we can expand really quickly. But obviously if we'd had a little bit more foresight, then we would have been able to do that at an earlier stage. So localize early, localize often is very important, and build a community strategy around different communities that can help you do this, because it's going to be too much to do it in-house. Finally, the obligatory picture of a Lego helicopter that I like to include in every presentation, because I like Lego. And I try and make it fit to whatever I'm talking about. And so in this case, the Lego helicopter represents less features, more speed. So it looks great, but does it fly? That is so tenuous. I can't. Can I change the present? No. Okay, too late. Anyway, I mean, I think you get the point. It's basically do one thing, do it really, really, really well, and don't ever really go. I mean, good-looking stuff is always great, but actually the functionality is kind of more important than building in tons of cool features that no one really needs. And finally, learn to fail. So that's one of the main things, is that you learn to fail, and you fail quickly. You don't stand there for 20 minutes washing your fire engine when there's a house burning down behind you. You basically realize what's going wrong with your app. You realize that maybe your app needs to change, that your approach needs to change, your audience needs to change, and you move quickly to change that. So if you're on the wrong path, you don't just stay washing your fire engine for 20 minutes. Okay, I think that is me. So thank you very much. That's my Twitter handle. Here's all the images that these kind people made. I also have stickers and things, but I'm going to be around judging a little bit later. I think judging, that sounds too harsh. I'm going to be looking at your apps and saying whether they're brilliant or not. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks again very much for listening.